Yeah, I mean, that's really our passion, you know, in our, in bringing the business of the planing mill back together. What we're really doing is bringing that tradition of a planing mill. A planing mill is what existed, you know, in the evolution of, you know, wood and things. You would have a local sawyer who might saw wood, and a carpenter might come out and take that sawn wood straight from the mill. But back in the about 1850s, in that beginning of the industrial age, it became the planing mill, which was a place where to build a home, you would buy your 2x4s, your windows, your trim, your lath, and all of the kind of components of a home, and then it would be brought to the site and built. And that was typically done pretty locally. There were many little planing mills that occurred. But as we got post-war and the industrial age came on, you got more into the lumber yard type of business model. And that went away, and you went, you know, there was Hechinger's back in the day, and now there's Home Depot and Lowe's, and it is very much cookie cutter. So back at the mill, we use a lot of restored old machinery that allow us to do it in the way it was done back in the day. And we focus on doing the things that people don't do anymore. And we've got some young craftspeople that are passionate about learning the craft, and you know, we teach and we develop, and every project's new, and we figure out a way of doing it. And that's really the fun and the challenge of it. Well, there'd been a previous restoration, and it had just seen a lot of decay and rot. You know, and the window sashes, the bottom rails were rotted out from just, you know, time. You know, and they have an expected life, and it's certainly been past that. But we did have enough detail to obviously take them and replicate them exactly as they were built. So, you know, that's really our work, is to come in, and we call it a kind of a forensic deconstruction. What was there? How did it work? Do a little homework back on, you know, with Lloyd and Burnham, and having that's such a prominent name. We could do a lot of history, and we could find this same detail in their catalogs. And it was really to, you know, to replicate it to scale, you know, for here. You know, we're building a 30-foot lathe to make the 6 Corinthian columns, and you know, it takes a little ingenuity, a little faith. You know, those columns up there were, you know, they've got a tree in the middle of them. You know, they're logs that were stood up, and then they were clad, or they were clad before they were stood up. But you know, we're basically replicating that same thing with a wood core rather than putting a steel column. You know, in today's world, you would have a steel column encased with a fiberglass reinforced panel that was casted in a mold, but doesn't have the fluting and the emphasis and everything else and the details that, you know, is so unique to these. Well, we have started. We're in the shop. We have 6 columns to make. We have made all of the staves, and all of the core structure has been made, and we're making so these are 12-sided staves, much like you would make a barrel, the cladding on the outside. And what we're doing is we're putting those in, and then they're into this lathe where we then it's more like a rotisserie lathe, where we are turning it at a slow pace, but we can put the emphasis, which is the taper, in the columns according to the Greek or Roman order of design. These are Roman order design, Corinthian columns, which is the high order of style. That's, I think, what's intriguing about it, is that, you know, there are many ways to do things, but what is the most correct way to do it, and can we continue to refine? And you know, it takes, you know, these things. It's like, I didn't learn to build columns. You know, we're building these columns, we're building the lathe, we're doing all of these things because we are in the middle of figuring it out. Luckily, we have a client that, you know, is entrusting us to make this happen, and we'll make it happen. but you just have to really think through it. And right now, in the trades, we just don't teach the craft anymore. And what we're trying to do is, you know, at the mill, I have a lot of young guys who work for me, but the most important thing is their mind and their passion. And do they want to learn? And we can teach, you know, and you can take those raw talents and teach the methodologies, and really produce some fine work. My guys, I don't call them carpenters. I call them woodwrights, because that term carpenter has been so diluted by really a guy with a bucket, you know, and some tools in it. Where a woodwright is somebody who is out to master the craft, and it's a continuous process. It doesn't change. Certainly, it's an honor. You know, it's an honor to be able to be a part. It comes with a lot of responsibility to make sure it's right. That's why when we're given things, we actually do a pretty deep dive. You know, like I said, to this greenhouse, I know the history of this greenhouse because I researched it myself, you know, and I wanted to make sure I understood how Lauren Lloyd and Burnham did their details and what was unique about their project, their products, and, you know, because really all we're trying to do is to rejuvenate this historic piece and keep it alive. You know, it's a nurturing process really of this property and any other. It's not really, I don't look at it as work.